This is a bit of a concern that's coming as it does 5 years after what the world saw, the COVID-19 pandemic completely gripping the entire world. We've not seen anything of this sort either before or since, and we don't want to see anything since. But now the sad news is that China is seeing another surge in what is called the Human Metapneumovirus, or HMPV. It's a respiratory illness. It mimics the symptoms of a common cold. So far, in India, there have been 3 cases that have been detected, all of them children, 2 of them in Karnataka, 1 in Gujarat. But those states, Maharashtra, Delhi, Karnataka, other major states big states across the country have issued health advisories. The Union Health Minister has said that there's no cause for concern yet, that HMPV is endemic to India. It's not a new virus that we need to fight. This has always been endemic in our society. But at the same time, we cannot throw caution to the wind, and that all precautions must be taken.
Five years after COVID-19 emerged from China, turned into a global pandemic and killed 7 million people, there is a new virus that is quickly spreading through the country and the world. The virus, which has been identified as Human Metapneumovirus, or HMPV, has seen cases spiking across northern Chinese provinces this winter. It is a respiratory disease that causes flu or cold-like symptoms but can increase risks or lead to more serious complications like bronchitis or pneumonia. Cases have been surging in northern China, particularly among children. The country's Center for Disease Control has pushed back against social media claims of hospitals being overwhelmed and fears of another COVID-like pandemic. They have pointed out that respiratory infections tend to peak during the winter season anyway. At the same time, authorities have urged people to take precautions. The World Health Organization has not flagged the situation as a global health emergency just yet, but the rise in cases has prompted authorities to bolster monitoring systems. First identified in 2001, HMPV is a single-stranded RNA virus that spreads through respiratory droplets or contact with contaminated surfaces. Cases have been previously identified in various countries, including the United Kingdom. Its symptoms include cough, fever, nasal congestion, and fatigue, with an incubation period of 3 to 6 days. HMPV can lead to more serious illnesses like bronchitis and pneumonia among the elderly, very young children, and people who are immunocompromised. There is no vaccine or specific antiviral treatment for HMPV. Treatment primarily involves managing symptoms. While HMPV and SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus responsible for COVID-19, belong to different viral families, they do share striking similarities. When it comes to transmission, both spread through respiratory droplets and contact with contaminated surfaces. Both primarily target the respiratory system, causing mild to severe infections. The symptoms include fever, cough, sore throat, wheezing, and shortness of breath. Children, the elderly, and immunocompromised individuals are at greater risk. And when it comes to prevention, hand hygiene, wearing masks, and social distancing can help curb transmission. There is one big difference that experts are pointing out. COVID-19 was a new disease which had never infected humans before, driving the pandemic-level spread that we witnessed from 2020 onwards. On the other hand, HMPV has been around for several decades, and there is a level of immunity in the global population from past infections. So even though we are starting to see HMPV cases beyond China, it's not time to press the panic button just yet.
So I just want to be clear about a few facts. Coronavirus was a novel virus. We hadn't dealt with that particular version, COVID-19, before. There were other versions of COVID that had come before, SARS had come before, whereas HMPV is a common virus. It's been endemic. In India, it's been there for decades. It doesn't show up with the degree of ferocity that COVID-19 showed up with. But at the same time, you need to take precautions, particularly if you're a child or if you have a child below 5 years of age, or if you're a senior citizen above 65 or 70 who has compromised immunity. Let's try and make sense of this story. I'm going to speak to two very highly renowned doctors. Dr. Raman Gangakhetkar is the former head scientist at the Indian Council for Medical Research, and Dr. Shahid Jamal is one of India's foremost virologists. He's also joining us in a moment. But Dr. Gangakhetkar, let me start with you first. This HMPV virus, it seems to have taken root in China, I believe, once again in that Wuhan region where schools have been shut, kids have been asked not to come to school. Here in India too, we know that there are 3 suspected cases, 2 of them in Karnataka, 1 in Gujarat, I believe 1 more in Kolkata as well, which we're trying to confirm, but all of them children. So first things first, how concerned should we be that this could possibly be a rerun of Corona?
Yeah, no, HMPV virus has been there. It has been detected only recently. To my mind, when molecular techniques came up. If you look across the globe, every country reports HMPV virus among all respiratory illnesses that tend to occur. What is also important to remember that we even in India, we conducted one study from ICMR in between 2016 to 18, where 16,000 patients were tested for HMPV virus as well as the other respiratory viruses. And what was found among those who had acute respiratory infection, the positivity rate was close to 3.4%.
Okay.
If you look at severe acute respiratory infection, which actually warranted admission in the hospital, the rate was 2.6%. So it essentially means the virus is present in India. It will be found in the winter season most often, and it has a milder course. It doesn't lead to death by itself. There are no studies globally, no studies globally where case fatality rate has been documented, because none of scientists perhaps felt that this is a significant threat to public health in the past.
So the positivity rate you're saying was in the range of 3%. Those who felt an acute version of this, who need to be admitted to hospital, was about 2%. So Dr. Shahid Jamil, if indeed that this HMPV virus has been endemic in India, there's evidence to show that it's been around for a few decades, why is it acting up now? We have 3 cases, 2 from Karnataka, 1 from Gujarat, I believe 1 more case they're trying to confirm in Kolkata. Why has it shown up now? And what should we be worried about it sort of flaring up now, like the way it has in China, for example, where they've shut schools in a particular region, worried about the spread of this HMPV?
Well, it's a case of observation bias. Because of all the panic that Indian news media has generated over the past week, we are testing for it, and that's why we're finding it. Normally, we don't test for it. It's a common cold virus which is there in populations every year. It's just that we don't test for it. The most vulnerable population for this are infants and aged people. Like for any respiratory virus, there's nothing special about this. And as Dr. Gangakhetkar said, it forms a small part of the cold virus, winter virus sort of mixture that we see. Perhaps one thing that is likely to aggravate it is the bad air that we have during winter. All respiratory viruses will get worse with the kind of pollution we have in our cities.
But Dr. Jamil, if I may,
yeah.
I mean, when the coronavirus initially started, a lot of people said that, look, this is just another respiratory illness, you'll be fine.
No, I'm sorry, let me stop you here. It's not the same. Coronavirus was an entirely new virus. The human population had never seen that virus. This is a virus that we see every winter season. So there's a difference. Population has an immunity to this virus. Population had zero immunity to the COVID virus. So it's not the same. Let us not tell people that it's the same situation. It
Okay.
is not the same situation.
One
We know
one
what we are dealing with here.
One cause of concern, or let me say one area of concern, Dr. Gangakekar, has been the grouping of people, or the section of people who are most vulnerable to it, seem to be children, young children, infants. Again, in India, the cases so far have all been that of children. Why is that, and what do we need to do to try and address that?
This virus, since it is there, you find there will be first infection that would occur. If it occurs in children, you will find those who are under 5. No, they are more likely to have severe kind of a disease. And when I say more, it doesn't necessarily mean the likelihood is high. No, the likelihood continues to be low. Sorry, but it essentially could be that they could pose a problem since they are handling this virus for their first time. Now that you have 4% prevalence, I'm sorry, the issue is people will be exposed to this virus repeatedly in their lifetime. If you look at one of the Chinese studies, it tends to say that by 5 years, 100% of the infants tend to show antibodies against this virus. But does that mean that they would have severe illness as they grow older? Perhaps not, because these antibodies are partially protective. Now, if this is the case, that it has a milder course, all of us are likely to be infected one time or the other in our life, the risk of death continues to be low. Should we worry about this virus? No.
So I want to go back to Dr. Jamil. You know, I remember in the early part of 2020 when SARS-CoV-2 was detected, a lot of people said, you know, SARS-CoV-1 had happened in those same places in China, in Hong Kong, etc. There's nothing really to worry about. There was a huge debate in many countries whether the lockdown route should be taken or whether you should just allow the virus and there will be, you know, herd immunity, so on and so forth. Again, I come back to that. Yes, the nature of the viruses may be very different. The virulence of the viruses may be very different. The target population might be very different. But given what has happened 5 years ago and how the entire world and everyone's lives was upended in a way that we hadn't seen in over 100 years, isn't it better to be careful? And particularly because the vulnerable group in this case happens to be infants.
Oh, absolutely. Nobody's saying don't be careful. There is a difference between being careful and going into a panic mode. And when you go in a panic mode, you are least careful. So yes, be careful. Shelter yourself. Wear masks when you are in crowded places. Because anyway, this virus is transmitted by droplets. And if two people talking to each other are both wearing masks, you reduce the possibility of any respiratory virus, not just this virus, drastically. So do that. I'm all for it. Coming to your point about COVID, yes, I'm aware that a lot of people had said early on that we had SARS-CoV-1 virus and this will be like the same. But remember, as soon as we learned that this is not the same, and one very critical difference between the COVID virus and the 2002 SARS virus was that the 2002 virus could only be transmitted when people had symptoms, whereas the COVID virus was also transmitting even before you showed symptoms. And that makes a world of difference.
Okay.
See, sometimes these nuances are very difficult for the lay population to understand. But this is for us to communicate properly that, yes, they belong to the same family, but this virus is slightly different. I mean, early on, there was a lot of controversy even around masks. Even WHO had,
Yep.
back and forth. And really, Zaka, that's the nature of how science is. Science is not absolute. This is not something, if I'm telling you something today, it is based on the evidence that I have today. If I say something else tomorrow, it doesn't mean that I was lying today or I'm,
Got it.
misrepresenting tomorrow. It's just the way science grows. It's just the way evidence. It's based on evidence, and that's what we should look at.
All right. For the moment, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Dr. Jameel and Dr. Ganga Ketkar, for joining us. Like both the doctors said, it is not anywhere close to being as drastic as COVID-19. It is a much milder virus. The people who are possibly most susceptible are children under the age of 5 because their immunity hasn't fully developed. If you're a normal adult, nothing to worry. This is just a common cold. Watch out for symptoms. And of course, do take precautions, as Dr. Jameel said. No one is saying to throw caution to the wind. Do take precautions, but it's not something that we should think is going to suddenly bring the world to a screeching halt.